What's up, guys, and welcome back to another review of a Better Call Saul episode. This is the final episode of the show, titled Saul Gone. This is the final, as far as we know, as the whole universe of Breaking Bad, El Camino, and Better Call Saul. It spanned over 14 years. It's still one of my favorite shows / universes on television. It's been an awesome experience all the way through, and it seems it's finally come to an end. So it's bittersweet for us to have all these awesome fucking episodes of television come to a final conclusion. It's bittersweet because it's awesome to see it all being wrapped up. At the same time, it's sad to see it go, because I think there's nothing really like it on television that makes you think about it as just as much as it has depth to it. There's so much to think about, so much ambiguity, and just really awesome camera work and acting. So yeah, Saul Gone. It's all been leading up to this sort of moment. So let's get into the episode then. I'm not going to be throwing flashy pictures up as much on this one because I've just come out of the episode. It's very hot in here, so I've decided I'm just going to try and narrow it down into more of a smaller, condensed video rather than going through plot point to plot point. So yeah, it's the final. So I wasn't really sure where this was going to go. There wasn't too many options for Gene's character as I saw it. There was a few endings that may have been happy or sad, but we got what we got, and I'll go through it now. We have a cold open. As per usual, you got to open it with one of these mysterious openings, and in this one we actually see a new scene from a previous flashback, I guess, from when Saul was out stuck in the desert when he was drinking his own pee and all that. This is sort of the staple of this whole episode. These little flashback sequences all add up to one sort of plot thread, which is ultimately what this whole show, character, and episode is about. And this is where Mike sits down with Jimmy at this time in the desert. He's dehydrated. They're sitting on $7 million worth of cash from Lalo, and Jimmy is basically having this conversation with Mike about them splitting and taking the money. Mike tries to tell him that it's not going to go his way if he does. There's very powerful people who will track him down and essentially find him even if he gets way out of the country. So this spawns a conversation between the two about what they would do with the money, and this is honestly one of the first times I've seen Mike kind of loosen up and just have a normal conversation where he's not thinking of ulterior motives, or when he's not just kind of pissed off with everyone. He kind of takes the bite from Jimmy, and this is quite an odd thing for him to do, but with it being a final episode, I thought it was good to see some kind of normal conversation between the two. And it was about what they would do with the money, and Jimmy says he would use 6 million of it to invent a time machine, and then it sparks the conversation of where they are going to go with this time machine. Now this is the picture here in the image there of the book, The Time Machine. I think it's H.G. Wells, and it's it's in Chuck's house. I think it's shown up a few times throughout the show. I'm not entirely sure, I would have to go back and check, but the conversation seems to go throughout this episode with different characters. And what it really does is it identifies their characters' traits and motives throughout, and often it kind of displays their downfalls as well. So I will go through that a little bit more. So in this conversation, Mike tells us about 2 dates he would like to go to, one in 2001, and I can only imagine that is probably maybe when his son was killed, to try and prevent it from happening. But then he decides to go even further back to 1984, and he says this is the moment that he took his first bribe, which ultimately led him down the road that he went down, which has led him to where he ended up in Breaking Bad. You can already tell from this situation that Mike's more thinking about protecting his family and just going back on the decisions that actually took him down this road. He regrets the things that basically changed his life for the worse. He wants to go back and make things better so he can be a good man to his family and see his kids and stuff. And whereas Jimmy here in this conversation, Jimmy, you think you're expecting him to say something about going back in time and fixing all the problems that he's caused over the years, his brother committing suicide and just all of those things. Like you'd think morally you'd be thinking about the more deeper things, but he mentions in this how you go back in time to 1960 something and basically use the money to buy stocks and just get rich and famous off money. And Mike even points this out to him. He's like, money, is that all you want? You have a time machine and you want to just go back for money. And that shows us Jimmy's thought process, his character trait. He's always thinking about greed and money rather than the things that he has in front of him. And that is ultimately going to be his downfall. And the same with Mike. His downfall is that he cares too much about his family. Ultimately in Breaking Bad, he ends up being apprehended because he is spending too much time with his granddaughter. So This whole time machine thing is a really interesting aspect of the show because it's all about what ifs, and I will talk about that more later on in the show. After this, we go into the present day timeline where Gene is leaving from Marion's house after being basically on the run from the police, and it doesn't take long for him to be apprehended, honestly, and I kind of assumed this was going to happen. I didn't think he'd get that far. There would have been either two options for this: either he makes it back to New Mexico and he ends up with the vacuum cleaner guy, or he gets caught and this whole thing turns into more of a sort of law drama. And that is the route that it did take, and yeah, like I said, it didn't take too long. With him being in the state he was, I wasn't expecting him to get very far. And he's actually caught when he's in the trash as well. He's in like a dumpster and he's rooting through all these little bags. He's got these boxes he's got out of the crawl space, and he has the vacuum guy's number in his little tin of mints or something. And I think he has diamonds as well. I'm not entirely sure where they came from. I can't remember. So there we go. We're not too long in this episode, maybe 10 minutes, and he is in custody. And this is where the whole episode turned into more of a situation of, is he going to be able to squirm his way out of this? What is going to happen to him? What's going to happen to the people around him? Basically all about his mindset and how his character is going to deal with this. Is it going to be more like a Jimmy moment? Is it going to be a Saul Goodman? What side of him is going to come out to try and deal with this in the climax of his story ultimately? While he's in a cell, he decides to call up his old pal Oakley, who now has his own law firm in all the years that have passed, and it's only right that we get to see some of his old lawyer friends come back into the fray. He needed someone to represent him, and it was quite an interesting scene where he just called him up, and he kind of knew his voice already, and he baited him into it by saying it's going to be like the case of his lifetime. And from knowing Oakley, you probably would have thought he would have taken this bait as well, as he does. So we have a cameo in this episode as well. We have a few cameos really, but this is one I wasn't expecting, and we see that Marie Schrader is actually here. She's coming to see this court case and oversee it, because ultimately the things that he did and the things that happened with Walter White and all of the deaths and stuff, with it being the Federal Bureau, they're probably more interested in the case of getting justice for the FBI members who were killed, Hank Schrader and Steve Gomez. So it makes sense that she is there to kind of be a part of the victim side of the case. And yeah, I wasn't expecting this, and I really thought she did a really good job in the role as well, just kind of making us remember just like what happened and how good of a guy Hank was and stuff like that. So it really stabbed the needle in there, reminding us what just happened to Steve and Hank, and just how awful that whole thing went down. They round up all of the things he's done, and it ends up being about 190 years that he would go into jail for, and he somehow managed to get a deal for 30 years, and he's kind of wiggling his way out of this, trying to figure out what he has on the cartel and everyone that he could use to kind of get a deal and cut a deal. And just before this, he actually makes a phone call, and it's very conspicuous. It sounds like he's talking to the manager of Cinnabon. I'm not entirely sure still if this was an actual call to a Cinnabon, or if it was all code words and he was calling the vacuum cleaner guy. That's my only sort of question I have lingering here, whether or not he was planning to have some kind of escape route or breakout, which is a part of the ambiguity of the ending of the show as well. And this is where Saul throws the curveball of trying to get his defense here by saying that essentially this whole ordeal of him being involved with Walter White and the Empire and the crime and everything that happened because of it, all the murders and death, is because he was threatened into it. And it now makes more sense why the flashbacks we saw in the previous episodes of Walter and Jesse in the desert with him, holding the gun up to him, and the shallow grave. It now makes a lot more sense now, because he's using that as his defense. It did actually happen. He was threatened at gunpoint over an open grave, and he could use this as a valid sort of excuse for why he was involved in this, because he was scared. I thought that was a really cool curveball to throw in there, especially with how they've shown the scenes previously in a couple of episodes. And it's so believable when he says it as well. We know that he did it for his own greed and stuff, but the way he says it to Marie and the FBI, it sounds semi-plausible, and he probably was going through a lot of those emotions at the time as well. So he's definitely using some of his actual sort of scared moments in the show Breaking Bad to work with his defense. And all he says is he needs one juror to work, so even he knows it's bullshitting. So I was curious to see how this whole thing goes down. Makes even more sense when he mentions about all the people who were killed in jail in Breaking Bad, in I think it was season 4 at the end, where all of the people involved with it who might have been able to rat Walter White out are killed in jail in horrific ways. Honestly, people are getting shanked left, right, center, someone is set on fire, and he uses that as well as an excuse, saying that he's on the run from being arrested because he doesn't want that to happen to him, because they killed like 10 people in 4 or 5 jails in the space of 10 minutes. So he's got a valid point there for why he would not want to be apprehended. He's fearing for his life. So we now get another flashback episode, and this is set when Walter White is in the vacuum cleaner holdup, I guess, with Saul Goodman. They're both on the run essentially, and they're both just waiting to be transferred to different parts of the country, I guess. This is a very similar scene where eventually it all comes down to them talking about this time machine thing, and you really get a sense that Walter White is such a prick. It's been such a long time since I've seen Breaking Bad, and we know he's a badass at times, but it just reminds you of how much of a prick he is. He's just, I don't know, he's just a prick. And this is where the plot threads through from the beginning with the whole time machine thing, where they're sat up there just in this cell, just killing time, and Jimmy asks Walter what he would do if he had a time machine. And as I said earlier about how it shows their character traits and their downfalls and the what-ifs of it all, Walter White kind of just completely disregards the question, because he starts thinking about how impossible time travel is, and he just makes ridicule Saul for it, basically. So we get the fact that his character is more bothered about logic and reason compared to Saul's dreams, basically. Saul's dreaming about what he can do with money or going back in time, whereas Walter is more about the logic of it all. And he says he would go back to, and I guessed this before he said it, I knew he was going to say this because of his whole ego and his hubris. He said he would have gone back to before he made grey matter and changed it around, so he became the owner of grey matter, which would have essentially changed his whole life. Honestly, he would have been able to pay for his cancer treatment, no problem. He would have been incredibly rich, incredibly well known as someone of scientific merit, I guess. He has always been holding onto this jealousy towards the grey matter situation, which essentially, I mean, I've said essentially a lot now, but it is the whole thread of Breaking Bad. Is he is not doing this for the cancer, he's doing it for himself, because he wants to make amends for the thing he lost out on when he was doing the whole grey matter thing. That's what the whole thing about Walter White is, and it's very subtle throughout the show. You don't, if you weren't really looking into it, you can just tell his whole personality and his whole bitterness and ego and hubris all comes down to that. So that is ultimately his downfall as well, because he has a big hubris. He pushes his ego too far. It's what happened with Mike. Mike got killed, and after Mike died, it all went south for him, and it ended up with him being with the Nazis, and he got to redeem himself in the end, really, but it was his massive downfall. That's what caused all of the downfall of his character and his arc. Saul here again mentions what he would have done with a time machine, and at this point he mentions how he would have gone back to when he was really young and not slipped and hurt his knee. And it leads to a very good point where Walter White just says to him, oh, so you've always been like this. So he's not just been made into this character of Saul Goodman because of the things and the trauma he's been through, like Walter White. He's always had this slipping Jimmy side to him, and it just sort of cements the facts to us that he hasn't really changed. He's always had it in him. No matter how much good he does, he ends up being a con artist in certain ways, and he can't help himself, which comes to his downfall with the whole thing with Jeffy and Buddy and the money schemes and the scams. It ends up to him getting caught. But it's the main thing about the show and episode. It's about the what ifs. It's about the decisions. We've had episodes called Half Measures and Bad Choice Road, and that's what this comes down to. It makes you think about what could have gone differently if they would have taken a different path, if they would have done things differently. And this whole episode is about dwelling on those things and thinking about what they could have done. And there's nothing they can really do about it in the moment, so they have to push forward, but it's what they're kind of dreaming about, and it takes a lot for them to get it out of the other characters, but Jimmy's always sort of thinking about it and dreaming about it, and I think he gets his redemption in a way to try and right some of the wrongs and the regrets he had. And actually Saul actually mentions to Walter White about why he didn't contact him or a lawyer during the whole grey matter situation, because he thinks he could have actually helped him out. Now, and Walter says that you were the last lawyer I'd ever go to, but at the same time, Jimmy back then, he was a decent enough lawyer. He probably could have actually helped Walter White in that. With his, he might have been a bit slimy, he might have been off the moral side of things, but there's potential that he could have actually saved Walter White's grey matter career, and this whole thing wouldn't have happened. And who knows? It's just one of those things. It's a what if scenario. We never know. And those things are always going through your head when you're watching these TV series, especially one like Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, where there's just so much good entertainment and so much tension that it's one of those things where you're always watching things back and thinking of a different narrative path, but you can't change it as a viewer. Saul is extradited to New Mexico for his court case, and he is heading back basically. And Kim gets word of this as well. Kim is going to a woman's refuge center. I think she's trying to get her lawyer card back. I'm not sure it's called, the bar or something. And this office looks a lot like Jimmy's old office. At first I thought she was back in Albuquerque and that was actually Jimmy's old office and it'd been transformed into this refuge center, but no, it's actually in Florida. It just looked a lot alike. It's the time for Saul's court case and he comes out in this flashy suit. I'm not sure exactly where he got the suit from, but he's definitely playing up the character of Saul. And at this point we're thinking, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna go full Saul and try and swing his way out of this with all of this bullshit and essentially lying to everyone in the room to get his way and slime his way out of it? And part of me kind of wanted to see that as well as what did go down, but just seeing him suited up and booted again, he's got rid of the jean mustache. Obviously he looks a lot older, but good to see him kind of in that role. And just by his mannerisms and the way he looks in this, there's a definite disconnect between Saul and Jimmy and Gene. You can see that he's kind of a mixture in between. He's still got like the lip pushed out like Saul, but in his eyes and stuff you can kind of tell that he's Jimmy behind all that, which is a good thing. He's kind of merged into all three of them at once. Somehow he was offered 7 years of a sentence as well. I'm not entirely sure how he did that or whether or not he should have taken that deal, but 7 years, I'm sure there's got to be some kind of coincidence in there between the 7-year gap between Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad and maybe the time frame between the show's filming and ending and stuff like that. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm not sure if it's some kind of metaphor for the 7 years of us waiting for this show to finish or something like that, because I think it's actually been 7 or 8 years. I think Bob Odenkirk said at the awards he was at the other night about how long they've been doing this show, and it's crazy to me to feel like this show has been going for 8 years when Better Call Saul was a good, I don't know, 6-7 years, something like that. So it's just crazy to think it's been a 14-year universe. So at the court case, he is repeating his same old story that he spoke to the FBI and Marie earlier, and it's interesting to see how he's performing this again because he's already done it once. So you get to see how he's changed his mannerisms and the way he's saying certain words just to kind of play up the story that he's gone back to his cell and he's worked on his speech for this. So I thought that was a really interesting way to see how he's trying to get the jurors on his side. But then it changes. He starts to tell the actual truth about everything that's happened. This is his Walter White redemption moment. Like when Walter told Skyler about why he was doing this and he was doing it for himself. We get the same thing from Saul Goodman here. And at the end of it, he essentially tells everyone that he's James McGill. Call him James McGill. Saul is gone. He's being truthful. And honestly, you believe him in this point. He is being truthful. He keeps looking at Kim, who's there in the background. And they're kind of locking eyes and making faces towards each other that they're in acknowledgement that he's telling the truth here, and he's kind of amending the bad things he did and just fessing up to the horrible things he did as well and just coming clean. And it's probably a massive relief off his shoulders, and same for Kim to hear it as well, because she knows that he's Jimmy again, and you can see that in this scene, which is probably why the climax works so well, because we just know he's coming completely clean here. And then we get the final flashback of the show, and this one features Chuck McGill, Jimmy's brother. And this one is more of an ambiguous one, but it takes place, I'm assuming, somewhere in between season 2 or 3, where Chuck is living in the house. He's still got his phobia of electricity. He's living in the dark, so he's carrying around his lantern. And this is actually where this image comes into play here. Some of these scenes are so familiar, I wasn't actually sure if they were reshoots of previous seasons with added footage, or if they were the original scene just with a bit of extra, but it was hard to work out. I'm assuming it's all new footage, but I don't know if it was a reconstruction of earlier footage as well. But they're having a conversation, and Jimmy's coming around to bring him around his groceries because he can't leave the house. And there's these moments throughout it where you you can't tell if Chuck is being honest or not. They want to have a conversation. He wants them to stay and have a conversation and talk about his clients. And these rare moments where Chuck seems to care, and it feels like he's being honest in those moments, but you never can tell. And it's quite heartbreaking to see it whenever Chuck actually does seem like he's reaching out to Jimmy. Jimmy kind of dismisses it because he knows he's probably going to just be doing it for a reason to get at him, or like he says, call him out on the problems he's making with his clients rather than helping him out. There's always been this dynamic between the two where Jimmy never feels like he's good enough, and he's always trying hard, and he's never getting anywhere. So you can see his sort of animosity to even open himself up to Jimmy, especially in this point in the story where they've already had a lot of collisions together. And then we have the whole sort of conversation about, and the main point of this conversation is that they always end up having the same conversations together. Chuck says we always end up just talking about the same things, and going unsaid, you can tell that what they've been talking about is the time machine. Maybe Chuck has been reading it. He takes the book off at the end of the scene. They've probably had these conversations many and many a time about the things they regretted or they could have changed. And you can tell Jimmy thinks a lot about this, and which means in theory, he thinks a lot about his time with Chuck, even though he had a horrible time with him and the horrible things that happened towards the end of the show with Chuck and everything. But I just love the way that this was kind of an ambiguous one where they didn't actually have the conversation because they've had the conversation so many times already off screen. Chuck actually tells him that it's never too late to change your path. He's been saying this to him all along, but Jimmy's never been able to kind of get off the path until he went off in the bad way with becoming Saul Goodman and doing these horrible things with Walter White. So he never really got off the path, but it's mostly seems like he's doing this as a way to get back at Chuck. So it's unfortunate for Jimmy, really, that he never kind of took this advice to heart earlier on. Saul, or Jimmy, is being transferred to jail, it seems. He's made this stupid contract where he gets to stay in this specific block in a specific jail, and he gets ice cream every Friday. And on the bus, people start recognizing him, and they start giving him the catchphrase of Better Call Saul, and they all start chanting Better Call Saul. And it looks like one of those scenes where there's going to be a breakout. I was half expecting like Huel or someone to crash into the van and break him out, but it just wouldn't have been logistical. It wouldn't have been real for that type of ending, I don't think. As much as I would have liked to have seen something like that, it wouldn't have really worked. It would have come across as unrealistic, really. So already we see that Jimmy is getting this reputation in jail as being the man who worked with the meth empire and the cartel. So it seems like, honestly, in jail he's going to have this life sorted for him. We have a montage where he's making something which is very much like the Cinnabon scenes. So he's obviously gotten good at cooking and baking over the years, and now he's baking bread for prisoners. So he's kind of on the good side there. So even in jail with the sentence that he has, he seems to have kind of fallen on his feet in a way. Which, I mean, he's going to spend the rest of his life in jail potentially, but he has come clean with everything he's done, so he kind of feels like he probably can have somewhat of a relief of a life in there, especially with his reputation. It doesn't seem like he's got everyone out to kill him. In fact, he's probably helped a lot of people in that jail before, so he probably is the king of the castle. Jimmy has a meeting with his new lawyer. Lo and behold, it is Kim Wexler. She tells him that she has a license back, and she's going to be sort of representing him as her lawyer. And they have the conversation about how he could have had 7 years and he didn't take it, and he confessed to everything, and now he has an 86-year sentence. I mean, it's still half of the 190, but he will die in that cell unless something miraculous happens. We have one final scene of them two smoking together, just reminding us of the old times. I think it even happened in the very first episode. I think I said it in one of the previous ones where there's been these shots over the show where they both just kind of stand up against the wall and have a smoke. And we had one final one of them together. So even after everything, all of their clashes and how they separated, and we never thought we'd see each other again, they've kind of come close circle and come back to each other in a weird way, which honestly, if he's the lawyer, they might even potentially be seeing more of each other now than they have in the last 7 years. So in a way, it could have kind of worked out. You never know if they see each other again, or how often he'd be able to even see his lawyer, or for what reason, if he's making an appeal or something like that. But it's a somewhat happy-ish ending in a way. One thing interesting about this, obviously, is the cigarette smoke. Everything in this episode, besides the flashbacks, has been black and white. All of the Gene present-day stuff has been black and white, but the cigarettes that they're smoking, we see the smoke we see the ashes of the cigarette burning in color, and I can only really take that as it's kind of like it's things are getting back to the way they were for them as a couple or friends or whatever. Or at the same time, it's more of a reminder of the old days when things weren't as hard or challenging or full of crime and murder. So it was a good little touch there. It's very subjective, but I just like the way they did that with the smoke. It's kind of the final scenes of the show. We get to see like a little bit of nostalgia in there. So we get the final shots of Gene / Saul / Jimmy just being in jail. As Kim is leaving, we get this nice big shot of them both on other sides of the defense just staring at each other, and he seems to have made peace with his decisions and everything he's done and his confessions, and he seems to be up for some kind of relief of a life compared to what it could have been. I guess it could have ended a lot worse for him, I suppose. Not like we should be congratulating him for this happy ending. He has done some bad things, but for being able to come clean about it all and come out unscathed and have justice served is a good thing. And it leaves it quite ambiguously, because he does actually say that if he has good behavior, who knows if he could get out earlier. And it leaves it with this thought that we don't know if he ever does get out earlier. And like I said earlier, with the whole phone call thing, where he sounded like he was speaking in code, I still feel like there was some kind of thing with the vacuum cleaner guy at play there, whether he may have had something worked out, if he was ever going to escape at some point. I don't know. There's probably something to be read into that. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but it's very ambiguous. I do love ambiguous endings. I love the sort of ending of Twin Peaks season 3. I love those things where it makes you talk about it for years afterwards, and they've done a good job of that with this, because this is the furthest in the timeline of Breaking Bad now, I believe. So we put both shows together, we have this as the final thing, and it leaves us thinking about what could potentially be next. So I just love having an ambiguous ending to talk about for years with people. So yeah, that's my thoughts on the finale for Better Call Saul. Please let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. I've had a blast watching the show over the years. I can't believe it's been on for so long. I never would have thought this sort of spin-off would have been on for nearly a decade. And it's not a spin-off, it's essentially a prequel at this point. Everything has just kind of come full circle, I would say. I've probably missed out on a lot of things to say here, especially with like shot of the week and stuff, that I can't quite pin something down as my shot of the week here. There's been so many cool shots, but that's it. This is the end of the Breaking Bad universe as far as we know it. It honestly could lead to something later down the line. I mean, there could even be a show of just Jimmy in jail, just working with all of these criminals. It could be done, but I mean, we should maybe let Bob Odenkirk have some peace after this now, but I would be down to watch that show if they did it, even if it was like a little movie like El Camino. That's all I've got to say. I hope you've really enjoyed my videos over the last 6 or 7 weeks, or however long I've been filming these. It's been a blast to talk about it with you guys and just get my thoughts out there for this just magnificent show that's kept me captivated for all these years and weeks. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys with another video very soon.